If you've ever had a project delayed because a client forgot to send you assets, or you've had a client constantly asking for updates before you've even started fulfilling for them, there's a good chance that you have an onboarding problem. In my small business, improving our onboarding process allowed us to cut launch times in half. Not because we worked faster or I hired 10 more people, we just got really good at getting clients organized and prepared before we started working. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the onboarding framework that I use, why service businesses get onboarding wrong, and how better onboarding can reduce churn, improve client experience, keep your team organized, and dramatically speed up fulfillment. If you guys want more clients, more sales, and marketing that actually works, you should subscribe because that's what all my videos are built to help you do. First thing we need to talk about is why onboarding is so important. Now, people have a horrible habit of thinking that onboarding is this miserable administrative task, paperwork, contracts, forms, calls, inviting a million people to Slack. But that's not really what onboarding is. Onboarding is just the process of turning a new customer into a confident customer and now client. Because the moment after someone buys with you is probably the most important moment in the entirety of your relationship, right? They were excited to get on the call. They agreed to move forward. They signed the agreement. They paid the invoice, several thousands of dollars. And then they go back to work or they go home. And that's when they start asking a bunch of questions. Did we make the right decision? Was this worth the investment for my company? How long until we see results? What's going to happen next? Some people hear what I just said and they immediately think that's why we have contracts in place, right? If they decide to skip payments or break the agreement, we will have grounds to sue them. But you guys have to understand, contracts don't eliminate uncertainty. They just define what should happen in the event that something goes horribly wrong. Service businesses deal with this stuff all the time. Clients sign an agreement, they pay an invoice, and they decide they don't want to move forward. They stop responding, they dispute a charge, even if it's an ACH charge, they refuse to provide required information, whatever it is. At that point, your options as the agency are really limited. You can spend thousands of dollars and hours enforcing the contract, attempt to negotiate, or you just absorb the loss and you move on. You don't just want to get a signature on the contract. You want to make sure that the client feels confident that they made the right decision to work with you, because a confident client is far more likely to follow your process and continue the relationship long enough to actually achieve the outcomes that they hired you for. Now, a lot of services don't produce outcomes overnight, right? SEO certainly doesn't. Paid ads can take a little bit of time. CRO takes time. And, the client can't evaluate you from week one and say, hey, these guys are, oh my God, they're so good. They're just as good as I hoped. And since your clients are inevitably going to wait, those weeks, months, or whatever for meaningful results, your onboarding process has to be the first proof that they made the right decision. Okay, now let's get into the 4-part framework. So over time, my team and I found that effective onboarding is broken down into 4 phases. So phase 1 is your expectation setting, 2 is your asset collection, then your kickoff and diagnosis, and then your internal handoff and fulfillment readiness. So every successful onboarding process that I've ever seen contains some variation of those 4 steps. So the tools might change, forms might change, software might change, but the principles are consistent. Phase 1 is going to be our expectation setting phase. So you can't wait until the kickoff call to start setting expectations. By the time that you get to the kickoff call with them, they should already have a very clear understanding of what's going to happen, the things that you need from them, and what succeeding in the engagement between the two of you actually looks like. You can't assume that they understand your process. Even if they've seen it on YouTube, you explained it to them on the sales call, you explained it to them in an email once, even if your process is relatively simple, because the client only understands the outcome that they want, which is to make more money. They don't understand your workflow. They don't know what happens between signing the agreement and achieving a result. You have to communicate all of that. And the simplest way to do this is through some form of onboarding page, onboarding portal, onboarding email sequence, or a welcome video. The format doesn't matter nearly as much as what you are actually explaining to them. So when a new client enters your onboarding process, they should immediately understand what happens next, what happens in the first week, what happens in the first month, the things that you need from them, how communication works, and how progress is measured. So for example, if you're running a paid advertising campaign for a client, the first 7 to 10 days are probably focused on infrastructure. You're setting up tracking, making creatives, researching the audience, making some landing pages. The client's not going to see any leads, which is totally normal. The problem occurs when you don't tell them that that is how running a paid ad campaign works. So if you don't give them the expectations, they're going to create their own timeline, which is usually very unrealistic. You guys just started making the ads. Why don't I have 20 leads this week, and they launched literally 24 hours ago, whatever it might be. When the client knows what's happening, when it's happening, and everything else surrounding the offer, they're going to stop second guessing you and the process, and they're going to become significantly easier for you to work with. Now we move into phase 2, which is asset collection. So after you establish expectations, the next objective is getting all of the things that you need to execute the project. This is where a lot of projects tend to slow down really heavily because nobody has all of the information that they need to do the work. Every service business has some version of this problem. Website projects can't move forward because you need branding assets. Paid ads can't move forward because you don't have the proper account access or analytics access. Construction projects can't move forward because you don't have permits. Software implementations stall because the system credentials haven't been provided. The common denominator is almost always the same thing. It's information is scattered. This is why your onboarding needs a centralized system for collecting information. That could be a Google Drive, Dropbox, Notion, a client portal, project management platform, whatever. The software is not the important part. The organization of the software is the important part. The goal is creating just one location where your team can access anything they need without hunting through email chains, Slack messages, or meeting recordings, whatever information might exist. You should also make it very clear what is required versus what is optional for the client to provide to you. All of your clients, or most of them, they want to help you. They just don't know how to help you. So the easier that you make asset collection, the faster you can start fulfilling the actual thing that you promised. Phase 3 is going to be kickoff and diagnosis. So a lot of businesses waste a ton of time during this step because they treat the kickoff as the discovery. So they spend an hour or 2 hours learning basic information that they should have collected days before. Now, the better approach is using onboarding forms and questionnaires before the kickoff call happens. So on the kickoff call, all you're doing is validating information and then diagnosing potential constraints instead of just learning about stuff that you should already know. So by the time you get on the kickoff call, you should already understand the offer, goals, audience, current situation, existing systems, and biggest challenges. And then the kickoff call is your opportunity to add context to any of those things and then reinforce standards for communication. So response expectations, approval processes, cadence for meetings, and then how to escalate issues. Any question that you don't answer during the before phases becomes a support ticket that will inevitably happen tomorrow. The last phase of this process is the internal handoff and preparation for fulfillment. This is 100% the least discussed onboarding phase. Now, onboarding is not done when the client is ready. It's done when your team is ready. Plenty of companies do a great job at collecting all the info, but then they just create a bunch of chaos with their team members that are on the project. So the account manager has one version of what needs to happen, the media buyer has another version or their own ideas, the designer's missing stuff, the strategist doesn't know the proper timeline for the project, whatever is happening. You just need to create a clean handoff into fulfillment. So every team member that is on the project, if you do pod structures, whatever it is, they need to know what success looks like, what is the thing or things that have to be delivered, who owns each part of it, where the assets are, what deadlines are next, and what the next milestone is in the project. Now, I have some general guidelines here for creating an internal handoff that might be a little different for your agency, but we'll go over those now. First is your documentation. So you have your SOPs that capture everything that needs to happen so you don't have to rely on, memory. Then you have a project board. So giving your team, visibility into the timelines, ownership, and progress of the project. So everyone knows what's happening, who's responsible for what. There's tons of options for this. You got Trello, Basecamp, Monday, ClickUp, Asana. Software doesn't matter. You might also need creative briefs, make sure your designers, copywriters, and media buyers are all working from the same aesthetic or strategic direction instead of making assumptions about the business. Alongside your SOPs, you also need implementation checklists, so just to reduce the risk of you missing very important steps. So for example, if you're running a Google Ads campaign, you should have a checklist that says we need these exclusions, these negative keyword lists, these settings for search campaign, whatever it might be. You also need client profiles just to centralize the most important context like goals, offers, audience details, or past decisions. So you're not always delaying projects by asking the project manager or digging through email chains to find the answers to questions. You should also have internal notes. So this is a place where all the members on the project can relay nuances that don't fit anywhere else. So for example, Recording that a client tends to delay approvals unless they've been given a deadline, so that helps the account manager set proper timelines and follow-ups. Whatever system that you use, the objective of this is to reduce ambiguity. The fewer assumptions that your whole team is making, the faster and more consistently they can execute. So the question of the day is, what parts of this process can we automate? So once your onboarding process is clearly defined, then you can start automating parts of it. The caveat is clearly. So you can't automate a process that doesn't already work. So automation works best when you've already established a repeatable framework and you're just removing the manual labor from it. So for example, when a new client signs, you can automatically create communication channels, create project boards, folder structures, assign team members, etc. So what does that actually look like? So your CRM or your payment platform will act as the starting point for this. So once a deal is marked as closed or payment is received, then you have a Zapier or some other connector tool that will trigger, and then you can create a Slack channel from that, create a project board generated with predefined tasks and timelines, maybe based on the answers to a onboarding form, then have a structured folder created inside of Google Docs for assets, whatever it might be, however it shakes out for your business. You can even have team members be auto-assigned to projects by tagging them based on keywords in the proposal. It's something that I've done. And at the same time, your email platform is sending the onboarding sequence that includes all the instructions that we've already talked about. Obviously, the end goal here is, instead of relying on someone to manually coordinate all this across all of your platforms, all the tools connect, again, using something like Zapier, Make, whatever it might be. So the sequence is running in the background, so all your clients get the same white glove experience. The objective from all this automation is to remove the repetitive administrative work so your team can actually focus on getting stuff done. If all your clients get the same experience, and your team knows exactly what happens at each point, it becomes really, really easy to scale any kind of service business. Hiring's easier because you can plug in your team members, can manage more clients because each additional account follows the same structure, and it improves everybody's accountability because they all know what they're responsible for. It just reduces your mistakes because your team isn't forced to make tons of decisions on the fly. Strong onboarding processes create better client experiences, better communication, better alignment, and better execution. And in most cases, it's going to create better retention because clients who understand your process are much more likely to trust it. If this helped you guys, leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions about your onboarding process, comment below and I'll give you some advice.